Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Welcome to the show, Ken. Looking forward to speaking with you today, Ken DeStefano. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah,
Enjoyed your other podcasts.
cool. Love it. I love it. Love it. I haven't said that for about 10 days. I've been a little bit quiet and been doing other stuff. And it's just maybe it's the start of autumn. Maybe it's just a natural part of the podcast year, but being quiet. So looking forward to diving in. So, listeners, as you know, I often start with this question about whether the guests like, to what extent the guest resonates with healing. And when I spoke to Ken last week, he said he came up with a kind of like an alternative subject to dive into, and it's a big one, right? So we've got plenty to go at here. And the phrase that you talked about last week, Ken, was living a loving, happy, fulfilling life. So, and who doesn't want that, right? Who doesn't want that? Um, so I thought we could just kind of break it down and talk about the loving bit first. So, because you've been married for all that same time as us, I think, is it? You've been when did you get married, Ken?
96, so I've been married 28 years.
Yeah, yeah. So you picked us by 1 year. We got married
Yeah.
90. We got married 97. So often people talk about challenges for adoptees with security, with relationships. What does loving mean for you other than longevity, right?
Longevity means the ability, in the context of what we're talking about, to have an honest emotional relationship where you're vulnerable without fear of being rejected. And, obviously we all have the fear. But sometimes I find myself as an adoptee, maybe it extrapolates to other adoptees as I talk to them. I think sometimes it does, that the fear of rejection so overwhelms the relationship that they don't allow themselves to be in a position where they're truly honest. And instead of being in a mutual relationship, they're just pleasing, pleasing, pleasing. And I think being that loving relationship is allowing yourself to be vulnerable, allowing yourself to be possible to being rejected, and likewise accepting that what is being given to you is sincere. It's not manufactured. It's not synthetic. So I think that's what I look at when I see being in a loving relationship.
Admiration. And when did you tell uh, your girlfriend that became your fiance, that became your wife? When did you tell her that you were adopted?
I don't really remember, but it was very early on. Very, very early on, before we got married.
Yeah.
And,
And
and, and back then, it wasn't like I was disclosing a state secret. It was just casually talked about in my family, casually talked about among people I knew. So
yeah,
that's why I don't really have any specific reference or memory of when it was told to her.
yeah, yeah. And what about outside? What about outside the romantic relationships? What about your relationships with your kids or with your adopted parents, with your birth parents? What does that look like for you?
With my adopted parents, my father passed away in 96, 97, actually,
Yeah. Wow.
97. So again, we always had a very comfortable relationship with being adopted. I'll tell you, the questions that bothered me that ultimately have surfaced in the last several years really were under the surface when I was that age. So when I was in my 20s and 30s. So we didn't really address it that much. My mother recently, she's still alive. Like any adopted mother, it probably took her as a little surprise that at this point in my life, I wanted to start digging. Um, but I couldn't be happier with the response. She's shown a true support. She's shown an interest in listening to the ways that it impacted my life and my perceptions. So I've been very happy with that. In terms of my kids, I don't know. Other than, I just love them beyond belief. They're great, fantastic kids, and I just can't be around them enough. I can't spend enough time with them, even though they are older. I suppose there's some adoptee related element there, but I don't really see it.
Yeah, because we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what is adoption. We can be pinning the tail on the wrong donkey, blaming adoption for different stuff. But we only have our experience, so it's hard for us to get inside anybody else's heads, hearts, or relationships to figure out what's going on. Um, so in terms of you mentioned your adopted parents and where you were at that time. So how old were you when you kind of came out of the fog? Um,
I came out of the fog probably, let's see, in my late 40s, about 47, 48. I got my original birth certificate in 2017. And really what I think happened with me is my first child was born in 99, my second in '03, and really experienced mirroring for the first time. Like I saw people that were me, and it was a little bit jarring. Unfortunately or fortunately, life was so busy at that time, I had to sort of repress all that discovery and intuition until life calmed down. It was just too busy with paying the rent, paying the mortgage, driving the kids around, night feedings, all of that. And then, like I said, about 7 years ago, now my youngest is in high school. Life has calmed down a little bit, and it started to. I started to think about it more. I started to have a little more time to breathe and think about some of the issues that I think were sparked at that point, at that initial point when my son was born.
it's weird, isn't it, how the busyness distracts us, right? When it kind of covers up what's going on, and we're so busy, we haven't got time to think or feel. But clearly, at some point, you had that time. And what was it like for you coming out of the fog in your late 40s? What did that feel like? What did that look like for you?
It just felt like a slow opening of all the question of a box that all the questions had been sitting in. And it wasn't a waterfall, it was a trickle. Like, why are so many of my friendships a couple years then out? Why do my working relationships tend to be very hot and then go cold? Um, and I think I saw it more in terms of my friends and working relationships, because I think what I would do is work so hard to be what people wanted me to be and find out and please them. And then at some point, it would just be, I would start getting tired of doing all that work. And then I would start getting resentful of them for for me feeling like I had to act a certain way. And it really was unfair to me, but it was also unfair to them because in many cases there was no really even, stated expectation from them that they wanted me to act a certain way. I was just forcing myself to act a certain way. And I started to wonder why I was like that. What made me different? What was really driving some of these personality quirks?
Yeah. So it sounds like you weren't trying hard with the closer relationships. It was the less close relationships, the friendships and the work colleagues. Yeah.
Yeah, the peripherals, some of the peripherals. I
Yeah.
think the closer relationships I had achieved a level of security with, and even, but it was more the brushes, the shorter term
Yeah.
relationships.
But I mean, was it a gentle curiosity? Was it a more intense? What did it feel like for you?
It started off gentle, but then it became like that itch that kept going away and saying, you know what? And then I started thinking more about how, I am different than other people. I am different from people in my adopted family. They're great people, but frankly, we look different. Um, we resemble each other, um, and I think differently. Like I would see pictures, and when I was young, I hated taking pictures, and I look different from the people. I have mother and father and two older siblings who are biological to my parents. Then I'm adopted, and I have a younger brother who's adopted. and I would just look different. And then when the other part is I would think differently and started wondering, you know, am I, you assume the entire world views the world the way your adopted family does. So you assume the way you view it is incorrect. And I started wondering, is it just, is it incorrect or is it just different?
Yeah. And so what did you do about
I started to search. New Jersey passed a law that in January 2017, you could get your original birth certificate. Just write a letter to the Department of Health. I did so. I got my original birth certificate and started to search for my birth mother. Took about 5 or 6 months, ultimately got her phone number, called her, we spoke, and I've been in touch with her since,
that?
including two half sisters and a half brother.
Yeah. So it's interesting, like you're looking for questions on the roots on your roots, on your background to help you understand or change the way. Were you wanting to change the way you behaved? Were you or you wanted to change your outcomes with relationships or
First, I just want to see. It felt like something was wrong with me, so I wanted to see if something was. Um, and looking at the past helped me see that there wasn't anything wrong. It was just a little different. And then once you get a sense that it is different, that you did have a different experience, first from your biological parents and the primal wound, etc., then I would move to the point of, wait, how has this affected my relationships in the past? And how can I make sure that it doesn't affect my relationships going forward in a negative way?
yeah? But you were seeking to do that through reading the primal wound, I guess, and
I,
through the yeah, no,
I didn't read it. I just heard about it. I just learned about the primal wound and
yeah,
talked about it. But again, knowing that separation, as I kind of explored myself, brought me to that.
yeah,
What triggered one of the big things was I read Anne Heffron's book, You Don't Look Adopted, and I was totally baffled by the fact that there was somebody in the world whose mind worked like mine and who had the same questions that I had had, that I thought I was the only person in the world that I thought
yeah,
there was something very wrong with. And it turns out in reading her book and speaking to many, many people that they're pretty common.
yeah. So there was a relief there, was there?
It made me feel less like a Martian.
Yeah. So you're pursuing it on two levels, right? You're doing your reading and you're searching for your birth. You're searching for your birth mother, presumably to what did you say to see if there was see what she was like? Was it?
Yeah, just to see if there were things that I always found peculiar about myself, where'd they come from? What did it mean? And I'll tell you, there's that. And since I was very young, I always had this burning curiosity about why. Why was I given up for adoption? And on the pre-logical level, and then most of my life. And I guess that question never went away. So I wanted to talk to her and find out what happened.
Yeah. But it sounds like you were asking that question why, but was there a lot of angst behind that question? I mean, was it a gentle wondering? Was it like more like a really deep yearning to know where was it? What was it? What was it like?
Yes, exactly. And I
Which,
said that on no, I said that on it was both. It was, I'm not a person whose emotions go from 0 to 10. I'm generally between four and six. Uh, so it was more like dull and persistent, but for me, very strong. But it was just once it kind of got into my brain, I have to get to the bottom of this. I have to find out what I'm all about. I have to understand these things because I kind of felt like I was at the point in my life where I needed to know some things to move forward.
yeah. So, what impact did have? What impact did connecting with your birth mother have for you?
Well, it was very reassuring because I found out that there was incredible um, confusion on her end. Not confusion, extreme reluctance to give me up. but she just felt like the circumstances absolutely mandated it, that she had no option. Mostly culturally, her family, there was not going to be support. The area she lived, there was not going to be support. And I was in the hospital for over a week because she couldn't sign the papers. So it was very reassuring to know that, it wasn't, I wasn't just a piece of garbage being left by the side of the road.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
still, there's still the wounds there, but it was nice on a logical level to know that there was love and it was a difficult decision.
Yeah. You discovered her reluctance.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think one of the key things that we do uh, as youngsters, and the younger it starts, perhaps the bigger it uh, is we take adoption personally,
Yes.
despite the fact that the adoption plan has been made before our birth, often,
Hmm.
right? So it wasn't like we were rejected on site. Do you know what I mean? It's not like a quality control in a factory where things are going just before they go out of the factory door, they fail a quality check. But we take it personally that somehow when how could it have been perfect? How could it have been if the plan's made before? If the plan is made because of all the social constructs at the time, the culture at the time. Um, and is that what you mean by
Uh,
reluctant? Is not seeing that it was impersonal?
well, first, I just love your observation there that, Ken wasn't given up for adoption. A baby was. A baby that had been committed to adoption before anybody knew that Ken was or Simon was. I love that approach. Um, it is, I, I think the reluctance I found actually plays in with that is once my birth mother realized I was Ken, it became harder for her as opposed, and Ken wasn't the name she gave me, but once she, it's almost a reverse rejection now that I think about it. And the way you put it is once she got to know and encounter me as an individual, not an abstract baby, it became harder. And it was very reassuring to know that, once she got to know me, every fiber of her being wanted to keep me, but she just couldn't.
Wow, that's pretty profound, isn't it?
Huh. I don't know if I'd say that, but I appreciate you saying it.
Well, yeah. One of my favorite sayings uh, is that we can't see the picture when we're in the frame.
Ooh, yeah, that's nice. That's nice.
Guy, there's a, a business business mentor who did a lot of mindset kind of work with him. A guy called Christian Simpson. Yeah, it's hard to see the picture in the frame, and by that, it's like we can't see our own strengths, weaknesses, profundity, wisdom, love. I had this moment a couple of probably a month or so ago now when I was thinking about a conversation I was going to have with a birth mother, and or an email I got from a birth mother, I think it was, uh, uh, a lady called Laura Engels, and she interviewed on the show, and I was thinking because sometimes birth mothers, I feel like birth mothers want to mother me,
Mhm.
like, or they see me at my best, and I think she seems to think that I'm a really nice guy, and then I had a tear came to my eye about, you know, do I see that? It's pretty rare for me to see that I'm a nice guy.
Exactly. Exactly.
Uh,
And I'm sure you are, but we just don't perceive ourselves that way.
because it's hard to see the picture when we're in the frame.
Yeah.
But that leads me on to your second word, right? Happy. So, what does
I,
happiness mean to you?
I think of happiness more of like a peace, where it's not the feeling of going on a roller coaster and just having the time of your life, or when the Giants win the Super Bowl. That's something different. Happiness is that peace that I'm on a path going the way I want to go. Um, I'm doing the work. Uh, I'm I'm doing what I want to be doing. I'm handling things the way I want to handle them. My relationships are 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 dictated by truth and honesty. I'm not trying to be something I'm not, and I'm just peaceful with myself and not chasing something that people tell me I should chase.
Yeah. And how have those, I mean, I think you used the word peripheral, didn't you? How have those peripheral relationships changed for you over those last 7, 8 years?
Yep. Well, frankly, a lot of them have ended because I realized it was an unbalanced relationship that I was trying to keep alive. But I think the good thing is that the newer relationships are based on a more fundamental honesty of equality. And I think they're much deeper. And I think that's really a good thing. And, it's very hard to let go of the past. We're in relationships sometimes with people for a long time. A friend I've been friends with since college. Basically we just drifted apart because I felt that we were not equal in the relationship and it drifted, but I've established some good friendships since then. And it's really a good thing.
Yeah. What do you mean by not equal? Or maybe to state it in the positive, what does more equal? What do these newer peripheral relationships that are more equal look like?
It means that I we have an apparent equal increase in maintaining the relationship with each other. It's not me constantly reaching out, how are you? It's not always being the initiator. It's not always being the conceder. It's much more happens both ways. And I think some of the old ones developed that way because I was so afraid that if I um, didn't do that, the person would just go away. And frankly, some of
Yeah.
them I probably, because of this dynamic about me, I probably, I don't want to overstate it, but they probably
Yeah.
weren't the healthiest relationships
Yeah.
in the world.
It sounds uh, it sounds healthier, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
There's part of me that also says that I think we can kind of get into a routine with the relationships where we are one person is the initiator, that sends the text message or the WhatsApp or gives the other person a call, and the other it's just a routine that we kind of get get into. And almost like it's not always who instigates the contact, who suggests the meal out, whatever.
And Simon,
It's not always a power thing. It's just
and maybe that's such a good point because that, you know, moves the discussion forward. And I think that I personally have this tendency to be like this. I have this tendency to notice that I'm like this. And maybe in this process, I just have to stay away from that relationship until I'm that
yeah,
type of relationship until there's more security. Like a lot of times I'll think like driving. You ever driven a car where like the driver's tire was a little bit low, right?
right.
Oh, I guess your driver's tire is on the other side, but
Okay.
it constantly wants to
We're on the
pull.
correct side. You're on the wrong
Yes, of course.
side.
But the car pulls that way. So you can drive it, but you just have to always be doing a little extra work to go straight. And I kind of think sometimes with relationships, you know, I see myself being pulled a certain way in certain situations and have to constantly making the correction. And if I'm in a relationship with a friend that is actually pushing me further that way, that's not a good thing. And it's maybe not something I'm ready for at this point in life. Maybe when I'm further through the fog or more healed or more complete, I'll be more comfortable in that type of dynamic. But right now, it just it it what would be the word? It would ignite my weaknesses and insecurities in an unhealthy way. And when I talk about maybe these relations separating, they weren't just disappearing. It would be a conversation, and it would be, it's not just the mechanics of the going back. It was much more substantive than that. So I do think one of the things I like to try and do is understand the way my mind works and and really think like, how is this impacting this situation? And frankly, there's some situations that are good for some people that probably at this point are not good for me because I'm not healthy enough to handle that stress on my personality.
You talked about doing doing the work. Um, have you done much work? I mean, sometimes people use that phrase for, going to therapy or reading books or what are they doing, hanging out, doing with support groups and stuff like that. Have you done much of that? And
I had done therapy. Frankly, it wasn't great for me because I think the therapist was not really in tune with these type of issues, with adoptee um, deal with. Um, I think I'm not to pat myself on the back. I think I'm a fairly self-reflected person, so a lot of this has been internal reflection. Um, a lot of been has been talking to other adoptees, and then I wrote a book which I found very. It's a novel, but there's certainly true elements to it. It really brought me into a place to address some things that I thought had to be addressed. And then when I say doing the work, it's times when situations arise and my wiring that may have been a little bit um, manipulated by being adopted wants the thought process to go in one direction, which isn't reflective of reality. So the work is at those moments trying to be conscious of the present, conscious of what is actually happening versus what maybe some faulty wiring is telling me that's happening, and just try and be disciplined and strength and strong to deal with reality on reality's terms, not a manipulated reality caused by some of my tendencies.
so it's like a self-check system,
I,
self-check, a sense check. Yeah,
it's an attempt. It's an attempt, and you know, what I always say about it is, on one level, it's very simple, but never confuse simple and easy. It's very simple, but it's very, very difficult because there's a time this little gremlin raises its head quite often and tries to make you think that something negative is happening when something negative isn't happening. It's just life.
yeah. I was thinking back to the relationship stuff, and I was thinking back to girlfriends and uh, wanting the ones that didn't want me and not wanting the ones that did me. And I was thinking, now, is that an adoptee thing? Do you know what I mean? Because a lot of people will go, well, like non-adoptee people will say, well, you're a 6 and she's an 8, so you're punching above your weight, or they will do that. That they will. Um, it's a human thing, not an adoptee thing.
It,
And
it is. It is.
uh,
But maybe it's an adoptee thing on steroids, as we say in
yeah,
with pre-baseball. I think it is more so. I got married fairly, I guess, 27. I was in my serious relationship with my wife at 25, and frankly, I hadn't dated much. Like there were not many. there was there was not much interest in me, right? And that's the way it was. And so it wasn't, I really didn't even have this dynamic that often because I would want somebody, but there tend to be not much reciprocal interest.
Yeah. I can distinctly remember the girlfriend that I had before my wife pushing her away because she had me on a pedestal and I just couldn't cope with it.
Oh,
Like, um, yeah, that was that was weird. That
right.
was really weird.
There is an old joke, of course, that I would never date anybody who would be willing to date me.
Ah, right. It's like being a part of a club, right? Yeah. Um, so you talked about the writing the book being part of your work on yourself, right?
Yes.
Um, uh, how to, what you talked about being self uh, a fairly self-reflective sort of a guy.
Mm.
Oh, I just want to pick up one thing that, in case listeners haven't heard us talking about this, probably have. But they are, there's a fundamental challenge with talk therapy for trauma that is pre-verbal. That's what, I've interviewed a lot of adoptees who are therapists for adoptees over the last couple of years, and more of them have said that, right? So um, it's something more fundamental. It's a more fundamental barrier, I think. You talked about it. The therapist it didn't go great because they didn't have a lot of experience with this sort of thing, I think is what you said. But the challenge is even more fundamental than that, with pre-verbal talk therapy and pre-verbal trauma. I'm assuming it was a talk therapy kind of a thing, was
Yes, yes, yeah.
it? Okay, so just to be aware of that as a learning point, listeners, because we I often ask that question, what gets in the way of us healing or us living a loving, happy, and fulfilling life? And some of it is not doing the work, right?
Yes.
Or um, being validated and stuck in our stuck and getting stuck in our stuckness
Yeah.
rather than being self-reflective or coaching to being coached or self-coaching to move forward. We're that pleased with the validation. I'm talking about myself here, reading the primal wound,
Yeah.
being relieved, and then the relief being uh, replaced by a feeling, well, I'm stuck with this. And then me reading the follow-up book, which is supposed to be about the healing of it, and just thinking this is far too much psychological mumbo jumbo, far too much to do. It just doesn't. This doesn't. She, she's she's defined the she's defined the challenge quite well, in my opinion. But she's not defined the process out of it, the healing. What she would, if she's going to use the word wound, the word healing will stick with her, right? But she's not. She doesn't define that very well, in my opinion.
So, I
Um,
mean, can I just give
Go
you
for
a
it.
quick thought,
Of course.
about healing, and the primal wound? First, I'm not as well read, and I'm certainly not as studied as many, many people in the adoption community. I'm fairly new, but again, for my own self-reflection, I've heard a lot of talk about healing from the primal wound. For me personally, I don't view that as for me, the best approach to the discussion because I think this happened to me. There was a schism between my birth mother and I when I was taken away. That will never heal, is the way I think, for me personally. Um, you take someone who was born without a hand, that hand is never going to heal. I don't think that the trauma that was imposed on me at that moment of separation, where for 9 months I heard a heartbeat, a breath, a voice, a singing voice, everything. And then all of a sudden I never heard it again at a moment when logic didn't function in my brain. And I was totally ripped from that. And that did something to my soul, to my psyche, to my mind that will never heal. Much like that person born without a hand will never grow a hand. There's nothing that doctors can do. Again, this is just me. I don't mean to say anybody else should think of it. And maybe it's even a bad thought. Maybe you'll say show me that it's a bad thought, which I would love. My feeling is what I have to do is like that person born without a hand, I have to learn to tie my shoe with one hand. I have to understand that this is what happened to me. And notwithstanding that, still get to the point of having a loving, happy, and peaceful and fulfilling life. Um, and that's why the thought I always use, again, even when I get in these situations where it seems to rear its head, where that trauma seems to come up, I'm not trying to heal the trauma. I'm trying to learn to tie my shoe with one hand.
We can go down it. We can go down the healing road if you want, but
Whatever you want. You're
well, I think we can pick the metaphors. We can extend the metaphors.
Mhm.
We can and we can play a word game with that. Uh, and I think the listeners will know um, my thoughts on this. I'll sum it up for you in two sentences, and then we'll move on to your topic because the next word is fulfilling, right?
Mhm.
So in and it won't. It's not going to be two sentences. It's going to be more like four or five, right? So
Well, Simon, just add commas instead of periods, and then it's still two sentences.
okay, clever, like the way you did that. So on one level, psychologically, we may be healing for the rest of our lives, right? But we're not our psychology. So at a deeper level, underneath our psychology, we don't have to heal because we were never wounded. Who we are is who we are at our essence is fundamentally unwoundable. That's that's my take. So I'm agreeing with you in healing forever on one level. I'm agreeing with you on that. And I'm also saying that at a deeper level, we were never wounded because our uh, spirit or our essence, our consciousness, awareness, that isn't a thing. It's not a thing, so it can't be wounded.
I love the way you put that.
I spend a lot of time thinking about this. Um, I'm trying to get it into a bit where I can clearly and state it clearly and concisely. So back to fulfilling then. What does fulfillment mean to you?
Fulfillment means that I have these things I want my life to be. I want it to be loving. I want it to have good relationships. You know, I want to be a productive member of society. And I want to feel like in those relationships, in my work, in my charity work, in my sporting that life, that the way I'm going about doing something is achieving the results that I'm hoping to achieve. That um, I'm attaining things in relationships and even in other things, like on a much more practical level, that I think I'm capable of achieving in a good way.
Yeah.
And that I'm not being dragged down. I remember my high school basketball coach, who was really, the total epitome of an ass. Um, but he used to say, talk about fear of heights. and he used to talk about there are some people who are just afraid to be great at something. And you have to dare to be great. And this was not a good person. But I don't want those quirks of my personality to hold me back from what I'm hoping to achieve in both professionally and personally.
Yeah. It's funny what some coaches get into, like um you see him on telly and they just think this. There's a lot of documentary programs, at the moment, and there's my mum and dad, adopted parents, are from Burnley in Lancashire, and there's a series, and it's called Mission to Burnley. Burnley is run by some Americans who are Mormons, and they and their and his dad. One of the dads went to Burnley to presumably to on a mission to try and build up some business for Mormons. I think that's what they tried to. And love the people of Burnley, and that's one of the reasons that this group of business guys have bought Burnley. But they brought in this coach, and the guy, you see the guy shouting and swearing at the football players um, in the dressing room, and they got relegated last year. Uh, and Bayern Munich have hired this coach. They must have seen him in action. They must have seen him in action on this documentary, and he's shouting and swearing at the and he's being very vague in his instructions to the team. So it sounds like a bit like your basketball coach. And if you're wondering what this has got to do with anything, uh, listeners, like sometimes I think we just have to check in with the people that we're listening to. The are they ahead of us on the journey, right?
Mhm.
In an adoptee group, right, or in a as we go on this path to living a loving, happy, fulfilling life, do we are we listening to people that are ahead of us on the journey or behind us on the journey? And if we've been people pleasing, then we may get into that position where we're not as discerning, really. You know, and I guess self-reflection and reflecting on others and whether we want them in our world or not. Because you've been through that, haven't you? You talked about that a little bit before.
Yeah.
That was a bit of a roundabout question, wasn't it? I'm not sure why I took us down that lane, but I
Well,
did.
it was very interesting, but it does raise the question of perhaps, we do get caught in these cycles where people say things to us that make such a deep impression when like you say, they're behind us on the path. Why they should be listening to us, not the other way around. And it gets in the way, and we don't have that the honest and accurate, maybe
Yeah,
accurate would be a better word, self-assessment to understand that this is not somebody who necessarily I should be
yeah,
listening to in too impactful a way.
yeah. I think about this validation thing being as and my experience with it being a double-edged sword to a certain degree. There's a relief and then there's a stuckness. Whereas a true coach in the sense would be asking us questions for us to encourage self-reflection, to encourage us to look at our beliefs.
Yeah.
And this thing that I find myself saying a lot at the moment, something fantastic from um, Gabor Mate, not feeling enough isn't a feeling, it's a belief. And what's the central belief? Not central, isn't it? What's one of the most common beliefs amongst us adoptees? That we feel that we're not enough. Well, what if that feeling isn't a feeling? It's a belief. What if we can put that belief uh, under the microscope, see if it's true or not? What if we could reflect on our beliefs?
So tying into maybe something we were saying earlier, you put that belief under the microscope, you realize that it's inaccurate and we really are enough. What's the first word of the next paragraph? Like, what happens
And
because,
not but for sure. So here's one for you. I came up with this. I was quite pleased. The agony after the agony of insufficiency becomes the relief in being enough and the ecstasy of seeing our infinity.
that's beautiful. It's beautiful. But I think this ties back to the pragmatic level. You've taken that correction of the belief, and now you're in a scenario again where your mind tells you you're not enough. And how do you deal with the fact your mind is telling you something that you understand logically is premised on an inaccurate belief? And I think that's what that comes down to the it's simple but hard.
So, so I heard something. I haven't name checked him recently, so I'm going to name check him again, right? Listeners, you've got to check out this English author, and Ken and I were talking about names before, and they have class associations, British names. Sorry. This guy's called Rupert, which is usually an upper class name in British. And I was, yeah. I don't know whether my mum and dad were doing social climbing, but I was almost a Rupert, and I was also a Nigel, which is a bit of a is again, it's not a great name but not it hasn't got the class connotations. But there's a my favorite author is a guy called Rupert Spira, and he has this book called "You Are the Happiness You Seek," and we're talking about living a loving, happy, fulfilling life. You got to get this book, ladies and gentlemen. And if you like listening to audiobooks, you can't get it on Audible. So you need to get it off the Rupert off rupertspira.com. If you like books, obviously, if you like books, print books or Kindle books, you can get it on Amazon, but you can't get the audiobook on Audible. So you got to go get it off Audible. Right, so you got to get it off rupertspira.com. I'll put the links in the show notes. Um, full fulfillment. Um, yeah, Rupert Spira talks about beliefs, and some beliefs have, are busted and gone, right? And he uses the example of Santa Claus, Father Christmas. You see your dad, you're 10 or you're 8 or whatever, and you see your dad coming in to your bedroom on Christmas morning with a sack of presents. And you and you never believe in Father Christmas ever again because it's become clear, right? That's one sort of belief, but a more the beliefs that we're talking about our uh, sufficiency, about being enough, that doesn't go. That's not once and done. That's something that keeps on coming round. It keeps on coming round. But after we have seen our infinity, it becomes easier to see through the the thought when it comes back around.
Yeah. And that's it, to identify that it's happening. You see it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good point. There's the awareness first, right? There's the awareness first, and then the discernment.
Yep.
So
Well,
it doesn't go straight to discernment. It comes back around. We recognize it. We discern it. We see it's not the truth because um, it's a disbelieving, right? Oh, I heard somebody else say, I don't know if it was Rupert Spire or something else, right? Um, and this is great, right? Do you see it as a belief or do you believe it?
yeah,
Do you see it as a belief or do you believe it? So if you see it as a belief, you get a bit, you've got a bit of distance between you and it, but believing it, you don't see it. So great. I thought it's a brilliant,
absolutely.
brilliant distinction.
And where I am in my process, and the reason I focused on that the way I did is I'm struggling to see it happening. That's I'm still at this stage where just seeing it happening is itself, discerning it, that the belief is starting to impact your a situation. That in itself is a challenge. For other people, they might have worked through that part where it comes more naturally, but it's still at the earlier stages, it's hard to see it that way.
Yeah. Well, you could be seeing it less because it's happening less.
That's what you're hoping. Yeah.
Um, I started asking you about what you got from writing your book, and then I interrupted myself with another question for you, or one of my rambling thoughts. So, what did you get from writing the book?
I'll answer this two ways. One was, as I said, there was a mythology from day one about me, about why my mother did this. Um, it's a novel, and the novel is structured from the perspective of the birth mother who gives the child up, and the adoptee whose life has been impacted and seeks her. So I got a way to find comfort in understanding why somebody would be given up. Uh, uh, and then I also was able to express in the other part of this story, um, share emotions that I felt. Like, it's a novel, but I say it's true but not accurate. What I tried to do throughout the book is create scenarios that would depict emotions that I really had, um, and share them with the reader. To go there, you have to go to some dark, deep places, some painful places that we want to avoid. So, on a practical level, I mean, it's such a common phrase that it's almost blasé, but there was an enormous catharsis. It's a 250, 300-page book. I wrote it while working full time in 3 months, and then edits took forever. So that was amazing. I did it for that reason. No desire to ever have anybody read it. Since it's come out,
Put yourself first, listeners. This is what Ken did. Okay.
yeah, just do it. Just do it. Like, I'll actually tell you at the end of the book, there's just a little page that says, to all adoptees, when you're ready, the world wants to hear your story. It's a wonderful thing. Do it. Don't be afraid. There's nothing to lose. You're an amazing person. My biggest fear in writing it was that other adoptees would feel that I was being cheating the experience, that I was not, um, being faithful to what it is to be an adoptee. Fortunately, I've been very blessed. Other adoptees who've read it felt that the emotions I conveyed, the situations struck them as honest and sincere. Um, so, just on a purely shallow level, I've just been thrilled with the positive responses I've gotten. That that I feel that, in my own tiny little way, for some people, I'm push them forward to a place that they might not have gone. I help them understand that somebody else thinks this, and maybe they can look at themselves a little bit also.
What's it called?
I will see you again. Hearts will sing.
Okay. And there's links to it in the show notes.
Yeah.
And is there anything else that you'd like to share, Ken?
I would just like to say, there's one metaphor I absolutely love. It's a GPS. I am one of these people that I am not terribly stupid, but I have an absolute abysmal sense of direction. So I have come to absolutely rely on a GPS for every aspect of my life. And we talked a lot in this podcast about having a loving, happy, and fulfilling life. And I do think I love the metaphor of the GPS, because a GPS will only work if you know where you want to go and you know where you are. And I think that's a pretty good way to look at a lot of this is, we're in this journey. Where do we want to be? There's no use planning a route unless you know where you want to be. And then once you decide where you want to be, you have to be honest about, where am I now? And once you figure out those 2 points, the journey becomes a lot clearer.
Brilliant. And do you want to point anybody at any social media, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, or you're not
Can
active
we
on
put in
that?
the show? Can we put in the show notes?
What? Yeah.
Yeah.
Which one do you want me to link to?
Is that, I'm not even sure. I'm working with them. My social media presence is awful. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn, but I've got to do better. And I'm trying to figure out how to go about it.
We're all trying to do that, mate. So
Yeah.
cut yourself some slack. We'll put some links in the show notes to Facebook and LinkedIn,
Okay.
listeners. And thanks a lot. Thanks for a
Thank
great
you very much.
conversation.
Thank you. You were amazing.
Thanks. Thank you, listeners. Speak to you very soon. Take care. Bye bye.